Let's now start talking about the how behind consequences. So step one, we are going to identify and communicate your boundaries. Now, if you need to remember how to do that, go back to the I of wiser parenting. Identify your boundaries. So you're going to look at what it's going to take for your home to be happy and healthy, for your kids to be respectful and responsible, for everyone to feel safe, and you're going to set up those boundaries and you're going to communicate them clearly. Next, you're going to get your hands off of your kids' steering wheels. You're going to allow them the freedom to choose, knowing that they will cross the boundary and telling yourself, I want them to cross the boundary so that they can experience the outcome of crossing that boundary and have that learning opportunity. Parents who are really wiser are ones who get excited for their kids to cross boundaries and make mistakes, especially when they're younger and the mistakes are smaller, because they know experiencing the natural outcome of those choices is going to teach their kids better than any lecture ever would. So hands off the steering wheel once you've set up those boundaries. Allow your kids to choose and plan on them crossing the boundary. So step three is to let them fully own the outcome of their choice. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into this. So this is where we're allowing them to experience the consequence of the choice. So I want you to memorize this phrase. And I mentioned it in the last video, but it's so critical, it's worth mentioning again. The owner of the choice is the owner of the consequence. So let me give you an example of the opposite of this. We know an individual who was drag racing with his friends and he got a ticket for going 100 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour zone. And his parents paid the ticket. So in that situation, who was the owner of the choice? The owner of the choice was the child. His choice was to go over the speed limit and endanger other people. What was the outcome of the choice? The outcome was that he was caught and he was given a ticket and it was expensive. Now, who took on ownership of the consequence? The parent took on the ownership of the consequence. Now, whoever is taking on the ownership is going to be the one who's motivated to change. So in this situation, who do you think wanted change to happen? Do you think the boy who gets to drive without any sort of consequence is the one who is motivated for change to happen? Not at all. It's the parents. They were so frustrated that he went out the next week and was drag racing again and got another ticket. The same scenario occurred. And they were frustrated and they were bothered. And this comes down to this principle. Whose problem is the choice? And whose problem should it be? So in the driving situation, the problem was a problem for the parents and for anybody else who might have been in the way of that young driver. But whose problem should it really be? Should have been the child's problem. So when it comes to consequences, those first three steps that we are setting up the boundaries, we are allowing them to choose, and then we are allowing them to fully own the outcome and the consequence and the problem of their choices. Now, in our case studies, we give you a lot of different examples of how to do this, but I wanted to give you just a super brief example that is a lot lighter than the driving example. I was going into the bathroom after the kids had been doing their nighttime showers and finding wet towels in a pile and clothes in a pile, and so frustrated with it and asking them over and over again if they would take care of those darn towels. Now, in that situation, who is that a problem for? It's a problem for me. I was picking up their clothes. I was picking up the towel. I was frustrated with the smell. I was asking over and over again. They had a little lecture from mom, but they're so good at tuning me out that that wasn't really a problem for them, and they just moved on with their day. But for me, I realized I need to shift this to be a problem for them. And so I started picking things up for them, and then they would come home and I would say, hey, you guys owe me a chore today. I picked up your stuff. And so I shift the problem onto their shoulders, because it's not a problem for me to pick up something for 2 seconds if I'm going to get a 10-minute job out of it. That's a sweet deal, actually. But then my kids started to feel very motivated to get things taken care of before the problem set in for them. And so they took ownership of it, and they were motivated to change because they were the ones who received the consequence of the choice. So when thinking about a consequence, we like to give you some prompts and some ideas of what to do. First is to think about what that choice would do in the future. If they were to use that behavior outside of the home, what would happen? So if your child were disrespectful to their teacher or to their boss or to their friends, what would be the natural outcome of that? And then how can we simulate that in your home? If they were to be dishonest at work, at school, in friendships, what would be the natural outcome of that? And how can we simulate that in your home? This really has helped people make their home a place that prepares their kids for real life. So we want to ask you to brainstorm how you can shift the ownership of the choice that's made onto the one who made it, and how can you do it in a way that simulates what happens in real life if they continue to make that choice. Now we're going to go even deeper with how to give a consequence in the next video.